The morning light filtered through the towering glass walls of Los Angeles International Airport, bathing the bustling terminal in a soft glow. Travelers moved in every direction, their footsteps echoing against the tiled floor. The low hum of announcements mingled with the clatter of suitcases and the quiet murmur of conversations. It was a scene of constant motion. Yet within the noise, there was a rhythm predictable, almost comforting. Seated near a window, Layla Anderson observed the world with a calm detachment. Her gaze lingered on the expanse of blue sky outside, its serenity a stark contrast to the chaos within. She was not a woman who sought attention, her presence blended seamlessly into the background. A tailored blouse, slacks that whispered elegance without pretension, and a well-loved leather bag resting at her feet. Her appearance was neat, practical, and unremarkable. Layla was used to this pace of life: flights, meetings, polite exchanges with strangers who rarely remembered her name. At 68, she had built a modest yet fulfilling career in business consulting, traveling across the country to advise small firms on strategy and growth. Success, for her, had never been about recognition or wealth. It was about consistency, hard work, and integrity. Today was no different. Another flight, another city, another day she would spend offering her expertise before returning home to Marcus, her husband of 40 years. He always teased her about how little she let retirement slow her down. But she knew he admired her drive. She smiled at the thought of him, her partner, her anchor. The boarding announcement cut through her reverie, and she rose from her seat with practiced ease. The gate agents scanned tickets with brisk efficiency, their faces betraying no emotion. Layla made her way down the jet bridge, her step steady, her expression placid. As she stepped into the cabin, the familiar scent of recycled air and faintly stale upholstery greeted her. She turned toward her assigned seat, a window seat near the wing. It was her preference: quiet, unobtrusive, a space where she could settle into her thoughts undisturbed. But as she stowed her bag and eased into her seat, she caught a fleeting glance from a member of the cabin crew. The woman Cassandra Blake, according to her name tag, had the polished, crisp appearance expected of flight attendants. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture perfect. Yet her eyes, sharp and appraising, lingered on Layla a moment too long. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, the way Cassandra's demeanor shifted as she approached. Her professional smile faltered, replaced by an expression that hovered somewhere between indifference and disapproval. "Ma'am," Cassandra said, her tone clipped, "please fasten your seatbelt. We're preparing for takeoff." Layla met her gaze, her expression calm and polite. "Of course," she replied, her fingers moving to the belt. Cassandra remained rooted in place, her eyes narrowing slightly as Layla adjusted the strap. "Make sure it's tight," she added, her voice betraying a trace of condescension. There was nothing overtly offensive in her words. No harsh accusations, no raised voice. But the tone, the lingering presence, spoke volumes. It was the kind of interaction that might pass unnoticed by most, dismissed as a momentary annoyance. Yet to Layla, it carried the weight of something deeper. As Cassandra moved down the aisle, her heels clicking against the floor, Layla exhaled slowly. She had done nothing to warrant such scrutiny. Her attire, her demeanor, her actions, none of it justified the judgment she had just felt. And yet, judgment had been passed. She turned her gaze back to the window, the landscape outside blurring as the plane began its taxi. It wasn't the first time she had encountered this kind of subtle dismissal. And she doubted it would be the last. It was a quiet, persistent undercurrent in her life, a reminder that, to some, she would never quite fit. Layla was not a confrontational person. She had long since learned to pick her battles, to reserve her energy for moments that truly mattered. Yet something about this encounter stirred an unease within her. It wasn't the inconvenience of being spoken to curtly, it was the principle of it. The casual way her worth had been diminished in a single glance. As the plane lifted off, she closed her eyes, allowing the hum of the engines to steady her thoughts. Outside, the world fell away, the sprawling city shrinking into a patchwork of shapes and colors. Layla sighed softly. This flight, like so many others, would pass. She would reach her destination, conduct her work, and return home. But a quiet voice in her mind reminded her that some moments, no matter how small, had a way of lingering. Some moments demanded attention, even when the world seemed determined to overlook them. The plane cruised steadily through the open sky, its engines humming a soft, constant rhythm. The passengers settled into their routines, some browsing magazines, others adjusting their seats, and a few already dozing. Lulled by the gentle sway of the cabin, Layla Anderson folded her hands in her lap, gazing out the window at the endless expanse of clouds. From this altitude, the world below seemed distant. Its noise and troubles softened into an abstract quiet. She wished she could feel that same quiet within herself. But the earlier exchange with Cassandra Blake lingered in her mind. A faint but persistent discomfort. It wasn't anger. Not exactly. More a quiet ache. A familiar pang she had long since learned to ignore but could never quite forget. As the flight attendants began moving through the cabin, distributing snacks and beverages, Layla noticed Cassandra again. She moved with brisk efficiency, her polished appearance unmarred, her expression carefully neutral. To most passengers, she might have seemed simply professional. But Layla could see it, the subtle tightening of her jaw, the slight impatience in her gestures, the way her eyes swept over some passengers with warmth and others with indifference. When Cassandra reached Layla's row, there was a momentary pause. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked, her tone polite but devoid of warmth. "Just water, please," Layla replied, her voice steady. Cassandra handed her the cup without meeting her eyes. There was nothing overtly wrong with the interaction. Nothing anyone else would notice. Yet Layla felt the weight of it, a kind of quiet dismissal. As though her presence barely registered. She watched as Cassandra moved down the aisle, her demeanor softening as she spoke to other passengers. A friendly smile here, a quick laugh there. It was subtle but unmistakable. The way her behavior shifted. Layla had seen it before in boardrooms, in restaurants, in passing conversations with strangers. It wasn't hostility. Not exactly. It was something quieter. Harder to name but no less real, the act of seeing someone as less. Of deciding, without cause, that they did not quite belong. Layla turned her attention back to the window, her reflection faint against the glass. She wasn't sure why this moment, of all the countless ones like it, unsettled her so much. Perhaps it was because she was tired. Or perhaps it was because, at her age, she had begun to feel the weight of these small moments accumulating, each one leaving a faint mark. Her thoughts drifted to Marcus. He would listen. She knew. If she told him about this, he would remind her, as he always did, that she deserved better. But Layla wasn't sure she wanted to share it. Not yet. It felt too small. Too fleeting to warrant the effort. And yet, it didn't feel small at all. The hum of the engines filled the silence around her. But the quiet in her own mind was harder to find. She thought of the younger women she had mentored over the years. The stories they had shared with her about interviews where they weren't taken seriously. Meetings where their ideas were overlooked. Rooms where their presence was questioned. She had always told them to hold their ground. To believe in their worth even when others didn't. But sitting here now, she wondered if she had done enough. If she had truly prepared them for the weight of moments like this. Across the aisle, a young man in a business suit fumbled with his laptop bag. Muttering under his breath. Cassandra approached him quickly. Her expression softening into concern. "Can I help you with that?" she asked. Her voice kind. Layla looked away. Her chest tightening. It wasn't jealousy she felt, not even frustration. It was something quieter. A kind of weariness that came from understanding too much. She had no desire to demand Cassandra's attention or to be treated with the same warmth. She only wanted to exist without feeling as though her existence required explanation. As the plane continued its journey, Layla closed her eyes, letting the steady hum of the engines fill the spaces in her mind. She told herself it was nothing. That this moment would pass like so many others. But deep down, she knew it wasn't nothing. It was never nothing. Because the small things, the glances, the tones, the subtle shifts in behavior weren't really small at all. They were threads in a larger fabric. A pattern so ingrained that it often went unnoticed by those who wove it. And as much as Layla wished she could ignore it, she knew she couldn't. Not anymore. The soft hum of the plane's engines filled the cabin. A steady backdrop to the quiet activities of its passengers. Some scrolled through their phones. Others flipped through paperbacks. While a few closed their eyes. Their heads tilted against the seats. The flight attendants moved efficiently up and down the aisles. Trays in hand. Their voices low and professional. Layla Anderson sat quietly in her window seat. The untouched cup of water resting on her tray table. Outside, the sky stretched endlessly. Its pale blue fading to white where it met the horizon. She found herself staring at it. Her mind adrift in thought. The earlier interaction with Cassandra Blake lingered like a faint echo. Its edges sharp yet elusive. For most of her life, Layla had prided herself on her calm. She wasn't the kind of person who sought out conflict or let minor slights unsettle her. Yet something about this experience clung to her. Like a burr caught in fabric. It wasn't the words Cassandra had spoken, those had been civil enough. It was the undercurrent. The unspoken dismissal in her tone and her gaze. As though Layla's presence was less than others, a barely acknowledged necessity. Rather than a valued part of the cabin. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Her fingers brushing its smooth surface as she unlocked the screen. Her husband, Marcus, was the first name in her messages. And she tapped it without hesitation. Layla had always known Marcus to be a man of action. He was thoughtful and deliberate, but never one to let an injustice linger. Over their years together, he had taught her the importance of standing firm. Even when the ground beneath her seemed unsteady. Her thumbs hovered over the keyboard. The words coming slowly. "I was treated rudely by a flight attendant. I think it's because of how I look." She stared at the text for a moment. Her breath catching slightly as she read the words back to herself. It felt strange to put it so plainly. To give voice to the quiet unease that had been building since she boarded the plane. Yet there it was. In black and white. A truth she could no longer ignore. She pressed send and set the phone down, folding her hands in her lap. Outside, the clouds shifted, their shapes breaking apart and reforming as the plane continued its steady journey eastward. Layla watched them, her chest rising and falling with measured breaths. A soft chime signaled the arrival of Marcus's response. She picked up the phone, her pulse quickening slightly as she read his reply. "Don't worry. I'll take care of it." It was a short message, but it carried with it the steady reassurance Layla had come to rely on. Marcus didn't make empty promises. She knew he would address the issue. Though how? She couldn't be certain. What she did know was that he wouldn't let her face this alone. She set the phone aside again, a faint wave of calm washing over her. Yet the unease remained, lodged in her chest like a stubborn knot. She wasn't sure why this moment felt so significant. It wasn't the first time she'd been judged unfairly, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But something about it, perhaps the casualness of it, the way it was done so openly, without a second thought, made her feel as though this time she couldn't let it pass. Her gaze drifted back toward the aisle, where Cassandra moved between rows, offering drinks and collecting trash. She seemed unbothered, her expression neutral, her posture confident. Layla wondered if Cassandra even realized the effect of her actions, or if they were so ingrained in her behavior that she didn't think of them at all. That, Layla realized, was part of what made these moments so difficult. They weren't loud or dramatic. They didn't come with shouts or accusations or glaring insults. They came in the form of quiet exclusions, subtle judgments, the kind of interactions that were easy to dismiss but impossible to forget. For a moment, Layla thought of the other passengers around her. Had any of them noticed the tension earlier? Did they see the way Cassandra's demeanor shifted depending on who she was speaking to? Or had they simply carried on, unaware of the unspoken dynamics unfolding in their midst? The plane hit a patch of turbulence, jostling gently before settling again. Layla closed her eyes, grounding herself in the steady rhythm of her breath. This, she thought, was what made her tired, not the turbulence, not even the interaction itself, but the constant weight of being quietly diminished in spaces that claimed to be for everyone. As the plane continued its journey, she resolved to hold her ground, to let Marcus do what he could to address the issue. It wasn't just about her. It was about something much larger. Something she knew she couldn't carry alone. The hum of the engine seemed louder now, filling the cabin with a low, steady vibration. Layla leaned back in her seat, her hands resting lightly on her lap. Outside, the horizon stretched on, vast and unbroken, a reminder that even the smallest ripples could reach far beyond where they began. The cabin settled into a rhythm of quiet activity, punctuated by the occasional clink of a cup or the shuffle of a passenger adjusting their seat. Layla Anderson remained still, her gaze fixed on the thin line where the blue of the sky met the curve of the earth. She found herself searching for something there, calm, perhaps, or clarity. Yet her thoughts, restless and unresolved, churned beneath the surface. The earlier exchange with Cassandra Blake seemed distant now, softened by time and the steady drone of the engines. And yet, the feeling it had left behind, an ache she couldn't name, lingered. It wasn't just the words Cassandra had spoken, or the way her eyes had lingered on Layla longer than necessary. It was the quiet certainty that, in that moment, Cassandra had seen her not as a person, but as something less. Layla's phone vibrated softly on the tray table. She picked it up, her thumb brushing the screen to reveal a message from Marcus. "I'm escalating this to the airline. You deserve respect. Always. She read the words twice. A faint warmth spreading through her chest. Marcus had always been her fiercest advocate. The one who reminded her of her worth even when the world seemed determined to overlook it. She replied with a simple, "Thank you," knowing he would understand the depth of her gratitude. As she set the phone down, Layla glanced around the cabin. Most passengers seemed oblivious to the quiet undercurrents of the flight. Their attention fixed on books, screens, or the view outside. Yet here and there, she caught the faint traces of awareness: an elderly couple sharing a whispered conversation. A young woman casting a curious glance down the aisle. Layla wondered what, if anything, they had noticed. Cassandra passed by again. Her tray balanced expertly in her hands as she offered refills to passengers in the rows ahead. Her movements were precise, almost mechanical. Her smile polite but distant. To the untrained eye, she appeared every bit the professional. Her demeanor calm and composed. But Layla saw the cracks in the facade, the moments when Cassandra's gaze sharpened. Her body tensed. Her responses became clipped. It wasn't hostility, Layla thought, but something quieter. Something harder to define. A kind of guardedness. Perhaps. Or an instinctive need to assert control. Whatever it was, it cast a shadow over every interaction, coloring Cassandra's behavior in ways she might not even realize. When Cassandra reached Layla's row, there was a brief hesitation. A flicker of something unreadable in her expression. "Can I take that for you?" she asked, nodding toward the untouched cup of water on Layla's tray. "Thank you," Layla replied, her voice calm. She handed over the cup, watching as Cassandra turned and moved on without another word. It was a small moment, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of the flight. And yet, to Layla, it felt like a confirmation, a quiet reminder of the lines that had been drawn between them. Invisible but undeniable. As the plane continued its journey, Layla's thoughts turned to the countless other moments like this one, scattered throughout her life. The sales clerks who had ignored her in favor of other customers. The colleagues who had questioned her expertise in meetings where she was the most qualified person in the room. The strangers who had assumed she didn't belong. Their judgments based on nothing more than the color of her skin. Each moment, on its own, was small enough to dismiss. But together, they formed a pattern. A web of subtle exclusions and quiet indignities that had shaped the contours of her world. And while she had learned to navigate that world with grace and resilience, there were days like today when the weight of it all felt too much to bear. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, the cabin shuddering briefly before steadying again. Layla closed her eyes, her fingers curling around the edge of her armrest. The movement was a reminder of the forces at play beyond her control. Forces that demanded patience and trust, even in the face of uncertainty. When the turbulence passed, Layla opened her eyes, her gaze returning to the window. Outside, the sky was vast and unbroken, its beauty a stark contrast to the complexities of the world below. She took a deep breath, letting the stillness of the view anchor her. In the aisle, Cassandra continued her work, her expression unreadable. Layla wondered if she would ever truly understand the impact of her actions. The quiet harm they had caused. Perhaps not. But Layla knew one thing with certainty: she would not let this moment pass unchallenged. It wasn't about seeking revenge or forcing an apology. It was about something deeper, an insistence on being seen. On being valued. On being treated with the dignity every person deserved. And while Layla couldn't change Cassandra's behavior in that moment, She could ensure that her voice was heard. That the ripples of her experience reached far beyond the confines of this flight. As the plane continued its path across the sky, Layla leaned back in her seat. Her resolve firm. The journey was far from over. But she was ready for whatever came next. As the plane began its descent, the cabin shifted into a quiet anticipation. Passengers stirred in their seats, gathering belongings and stretching stiff limbs. The calm hum of the engine softened, replaced by the occasional rustle of overhead compartments opening and the low murmur of conversations. The view outside the window showed the city below. A patchwork of streets and buildings bathed in the soft light of late afternoon. Layla Anderson adjusted her seatbelt, her hands moving with practiced ease. She had flown countless times before, but today felt different. The tension from earlier still lingered, faint but insistent, like a distant hum that refused to fade. Across the aisle, a young couple whispered to each other, their faces close as they shared a quiet laugh. The sound, light and carefree, reminded Layla of the time she and Marcus had traveled together. Their conversations filled with plans and shared excitement. She smiled faintly at the memory. But the warmth of it was quickly overshadowed by the weight of her present thoughts. Cassandra Blake moved through the cabin with her usual efficiency, ensuring seatbacks were upright and tray tables stowed. Her demeanor remained composed, her expression neutral. But Layla noticed the way her gaze flickered quick, assessing lingering on certain passengers while barely acknowledging others. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But Layla saw it clearly now. She had learned to recognize the patterns. The quiet ways in which people revealed their biases without saying a word. When Cassandra reached Layla's row, she paused briefly. Her tone clipped but professional. "Please ensure your bag is secure under the seat in front of you," she said. Her words delivered with the same sharpness Layla had felt earlier. "It is," Layla replied calmly, meeting Cassandra's gaze. For a moment, their eyes locked. And Layla thought she saw something flicker their hesitation. Perhaps. Or discomfort. But just as quickly, it was gone. Replaced by the practiced indifference Cassandra wore like armor. The interaction was brief, almost mundane. Yet it left Layla with a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't about Cassandra alone. It was about something much larger. Something woven into the fabric of everyday life. Cassandra's actions were a thread in that fabric. One of many that contributed to a pattern Layla had spent her entire life navigating. As the plane touched down, the cabin jolted slightly, the wheels meeting the runway with a soft thud. Layla exhaled, her fingers unclenching from the armrest. Around her, passengers reached for their bags, their movements brisk and purposeful. The journey was nearly over. Yet Layla felt as though something important was just beginning. She reached for her phone, unlocking the screen to find another message from Marcus. "Everything is in motion. Trust me, we'll make this right." She read the words twice, her chest tightening with a mix of relief and resolve. Marcus's confidence was steadying. A reminder that she wasn't alone in this. Yet she knew the outcome wouldn't depend solely on him. It was up to her. To ensure her voice was heard. As the plane taxied to the gate, Layla gathered her belongings, her movements deliberate. When the seatbelt sign turned off, she stood, slipping her bag over her shoulder. The passengers around her shuffled into the aisle, their faces reflecting the familiar impatience of disembarkation. Layla waited her turn, her expression calm but focused. When she stepped into the aisle, she glanced toward Cassandra, who stood near the front of the cabin. Her posture rigid. Their eyes met briefly. And in that moment, Layla felt a strange sense of understanding, not forgiveness, but recognition. Cassandra, for all her authority and professionalism, was part of a system she might not even fully understand. Layla wasn't angry at her. Not exactly. She was tired of being reduced to someone else's assumptions. Tired of the small but constant reminders that she had to work harder to be seen. To be valued. To belong. As she stepped off the plane, the cool air of the jet bridge brushed against her face. Each step felt deliberate. Her heels clicking softly against the floor. She didn't look back. There was no need. What mattered now was what came next. In the terminal, the familiar chaos of arrivals greeted her, voices overlapping. Suitcases rolling. Families reuniting with embraces and smiles. Layla walked through it all. Her stride steady. Her mind clear. She knew Marcus would be waiting for her call. Eager to discuss what steps they would take together. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be simple or easy. But she also knew that speaking out, refusing to let the moment pass unnoticed, was an act of quiet defiance. One that mattered not just for her but for everyone who had ever felt the weight of the same invisible lines. As Layla exited the terminal and stepped into the warm embrace of the evening sun, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. The journey was far from over. But she was ready. Because even in the face of small injustices, she believed in the power of standing firm. Of making ripples that could grow into waves. And sometimes, those ripples began with something as simple as taking the next step forward. The office of Cassandra Blake's supervisor was quieter than usual. The hum of distant conversations from the nearby desks barely reached the room. The muted sound of phones ringing adding to the subdued atmosphere. Cassandra sat across from her manager. Her posture stiff. Her hands folded tightly in her lap. The air felt heavy. Weighted by an unspoken tension she couldn't yet define. "I received a report about your behavior on yesterday's flight," the supervisor said. Her voice calm but firm. She slid a printed document across the desk. "It seems there were concerns raised by a passenger. Specifically, regarding your tone and demeanor." Cassandra's brows furrowed as she scanned the paper. The details were brief but clear. The passenger, Layla Anderson, had felt singled out, judged not by her actions but by her appearance. Cassandra's first instinct was to defend herself. To insist she had been professional, courteous, and efficient. Yet something about the way the supervisor looked at her stopped her words before they reached her lips. "This is serious," the supervisor continued. Her tone even. "We've spoken before about the importance of maintaining not just professionalism, but respect, genuine respect for all passengers. The feedback we've received suggests you may need to reflect on whether that's truly happening." The word stung. But what unsettled Cassandra more was the flicker of recognition she felt. She had been short with Layla. Hadn't she? Dismissive. Perhaps. But why? She searched her memory for a justification. Something to explain the way she had acted. Yet the harder she looked, the less she found. "I didn't mean to offend anyone," Cassandra said finally. Her voice quieter than she intended. "I was just doing my job." The supervisor nodded. Her expression softening slightly. "I'm not saying you intended harm. But impact matters more than intent. You may not have realized it. But your actions sent a message that this passenger didn't deserve the same respect you gave others." Cassandra felt a tightness in her chest. A mix of defensiveness and shame. She wanted to push back. To argue that her actions had been misinterpreted. But deep down, A part of her knew the truth. She had made assumptions about Layla, about who she was. About what kind of person she might be based on nothing more than a glance. It was a quiet realization. One that settled over her like a shadow. She thought back to the flight. To the way she had felt a vague annoyance toward Layla from the moment she boarded. Not because of anything Layla had done. But because she didn't quite fit the image Cassandra unconsciously expected. "I see," Cassandra said at last. The words heavy. She met her supervisor's gaze. Finding no judgment there. Only a quiet insistence that she listen and learn. "What happens now?" "We're implementing additional training for all staff," the supervisor said. "Specifically focused on unconscious bias and fostering inclusivity. You'll be part of that. And I'd also like you to take some time to reflect on this experience, not just for the sake of your role here, but for yourself." The conversation ended soon after. And Cassandra left the office feeling unmoored. She walked through the bustling corridors of the airline headquarters. Her thoughts a tangled mix of guilt, frustration, and self-reflection. The idea of unconscious bias wasn't new to her. She had heard the term in passing. Seen it mentioned in articles and seminars. But she had never thought of herself as someone who carried those biases. She prided herself on being fair. On treating every passenger with the same professionalism. Yet now, she couldn't deny that something within her had faltered. And that falter had caused harm. Later that evening, Cassandra sat in her small apartment. The quiet of the space pressing down on her. She replayed the moments of the flight in her mind. Examining them with a scrutiny she hadn't allowed herself before. The way she had looked at Layla. The sharpness in her tone. The extra moments of observation that weren't quite necessary. They had seemed harmless at the time. But now, in the stillness of her living room, they loomed large. She thought of Layla not as a passenger, but as a person. What must it have felt like to sit there, knowing you were being judged for reasons you couldn't control? Cassandra felt a pang of shame. But also a faint glimmer of resolve. She couldn't change what had happened. But she could change what came next. The next morning, Cassandra arrived at the airline's training center. Determined to approach the session with an open mind. She didn't expect instant absolution. Nor did she think a single session could erase the patterns she now recognized in herself. But she knew this was a beginning, a step toward becoming the person she thought she already was. As the instructor spoke about the subtle ways bias could manifest, Cassandra found herself listening more closely than she ever had before. The examples felt personal now. The lessons cutting deeper. For the first time, she saw the ways in which her actions, small, fleeting, seemingly insignificant, had the power to shape someone else's experience. And for the first time, she realized how much power she had to change that. Underscore 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 underscore. Back at home, Cassandra sat by the window. The city skyline stretching out before her. The guilt hadn't vanished. But it had shifted. Tempered by the knowledge that she could do better. She thought of Layla again. Her calm presence and quiet dignity. And felt a flicker of gratitude. Sometimes, Cassandra thought, the hardest truths were the ones that brought the most growth. And while the journey ahead would be long, she was willing to take it. One step at a time. The days after the flight unfolded like ripples on a still pond. Each event sending quiet waves of consequence. Layla Anderson found herself at the center of a discussion she hadn't planned to start. Marcus had followed through with his promise, reaching out to the airline's senior management. His message was clear, calm, and resolute: respect must be non-negotiable. Layla hadn't expected much at first. She had lived long enough to know that complaints often vanished into the machinery of corporate bureaucracy, filed away and forgotten. But this time felt different. Perhaps it was Marcus's persistence. Or perhaps it was the undeniable truth of her experience that resonated with those in power. Whatever the reason, the airline responded swiftly. She received a formal apology within days, accompanied by an invitation to discuss her experience further with the company's leadership. Layla hesitated at first. She wasn't one for public confrontation. But Marcus encouraged her, reminding her that this wasn't just about her. It was about ensuring that no one else would endure the same quiet indignities she had faced. The meeting took place in a sleek conference room at the airline's headquarters. Layla was greeted by the airline's CEO, a middle-aged man with silver hair and a thoughtful expression. He introduced her to a small team of executives, their faces attentive and serious. "Mrs. Anderson," the CEO began, "thank you for bringing this to our attention. We deeply regret the experience you had on your flight. It's clear we fell short, and we are committed to making this right." Layla listened as he detailed the steps the airline planned to take: enhanced training programs for staff, a review of customer service protocols, and a renewed emphasis on treating every passenger with dignity and respect. She appreciated his words, but she also knew that promises alone weren't enough. "I'm not here for an apology," Layla said, her voice steady but firm. "What matters to me is that this doesn't happen to someone else. It's easy to dismiss moments like the one I experienced as small, but they add up. They send a message, intentional or not, that some people are worth less than others. That's not something I can accept." The room fell quiet for a moment, her words settling over the group like a weight. The CEO nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right," he said. "And that's why we're taking immediate action. We want to ensure that every passenger feels seen, valued, and respected. Your feedback has been instrumental in helping us understand where we've fallen short." As the meeting concluded, Layla felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She hadn't set out to make waves, but she was glad she had spoken up. Change, she knew, often began with small acts of courage. And she hoped her actions would spark something larger. Underscore 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 underscore. Meanwhile, Cassandra Blake was grappling with the aftermath of her own realization. The training sessions had been eye-opening, forcing her to confront biases she hadn't known she carried. But what stayed with her most was a letter she received from the airline's management, a summary of Layla's feedback and a reminder of the impact her actions could have. Cassandra read the letter twice, each word pressing into her like a quiet rebuke. She thought of Layla, her calm demeanor, her quiet dignity. Cassandra had been wrong about her wrong in ways that went deeper than a single interaction. It was a humbling realization, and one she knew she couldn't ignore. She decided to write a letter of her own, addressed directly to Layla. It took her hours to find the right words. But when she finished, the letter felt honest. "Mrs. Anderson," she began, "I want to express my deepest apologies for the way I treated you. I know my actions made you feel unseen. And for that, I am truly sorry. Your courage in addressing this has opened my eyes to the ways I can do better, not just as a flight attendant, but as a person. Thank you for teaching me something I didn't know I needed to learn." When Layla received the letter, she was surprised. She hadn't expected anything from Cassandra. And reading the words stirred a complex mix of emotions. She felt a flicker of anger, remembering the sting of the initial interaction. But she also felt something softer, a sense of hope that perhaps, in this small moment, change was possible. Underscore 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 underscore. In the weeks that followed, the airline announced its new initiatives, emphasizing respect and inclusivity across all aspects of its operations. Passengers noticed the difference, and employees began to approach their roles with a renewed sense of purpose. For Layla, the experience was a reminder of the power of persistence, of refusing to let small moments of injustice pass without challenge. And while she knew the road ahead would still be filled with its share of obstacles, she felt a quiet optimism. Sitting on her porch one evening, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and gold, Layla thought of Marcus's words, "We'll make this right." He had been right, in more ways than one. The journey wasn't just about correcting a single wrong, it was about creating ripples of change that could spread far beyond what she could see. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Layla smiled to herself. Justice, she realized, wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes, it was quiet and deliberate, unfolding one step at a time. And that was enough. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Layla Anderson's home, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. She sat at the dining table, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. The house was quiet except for the faint rustle of leaves outside, the world stirring gently as a new day began. Layla had always cherished moments like these, simple, unhurried, filled with a sense of calm. But today, her thoughts were far from still. The events of the past few weeks replayed in her mind, each moment etched with a clarity that surprised her. What had begun as a small, uncomfortable exchange on a flight had grown into something she hadn't anticipated, a conversation about respect, dignity, and the quiet, pervasive ways bias shaped everyday life. She glanced at the letter on the table in front of her, the one from Cassandra Blake. Layla had read it several times since it arrived, each word carrying the weight of an apology she hadn't expected. Cassandra's words were sincere, even vulnerable, and they spoke to a willingness to change that Layla couldn't ignore. Yet forgiveness, Layla had learned, was rarely immediate. It required time, reflection, and the space to process not just the harm done, but the lessons it brought. As she folded the letter and placed it back in its envelope, she felt a quiet sense of resolution. Cassandra's journey was her own, and while Layla couldn't erase the past, she hoped the future would hold something better for both of them. Underscore 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 underscore. Later that afternoon, Marcus joined her on the porch, a book in hand and a soft smile on his face. He took a seat beside her, the wood creaking gently beneath his weight. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, the golden light of the setting sun warming their faces. "I've been thinking," Layla said finally, her voice thoughtful, "about how small moments can carry so much weight. How they can hurt. Yes. But also how they can heal." Marcus set his book down, his gaze steady. "That flight was one moment," he said. "But what you did afterward, speaking up, sharing your experience, that's what created change. That's what made it matter." Layla nodded, her thoughts drifting to the airline's response. The new training programs. The policies they had implemented. And the quiet shifts she had begun to hear about from other passengers. It wasn't a perfect solution, no single act could undo years of ingrained habits and assumptions. But it was a start. And that was enough. She turned to Marcus, a faint smile playing at her lips. "You know," she said, "when I first sent you that message, I didn't expect anything to come of it. I just needed to tell someone to feel like I wasn't alone." "You weren't," Marcus said simply. He reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "And you never will be. Underscore 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 underscore. In the days that followed, Layla began to notice the ripples of her actions in unexpected places. A neighbor stopped her during a morning walk to share a similar experience they had faced years ago. Their words tinged with a mix of sorrow and gratitude. An old friend called to say they had read about the airline's new initiatives and felt inspired to speak up in their own workplace. Even strangers reached out, their messages filled with stories that mirrored her own. Each interaction reminded Layla of something she had always known but sometimes forgotten, that change often began with a single voice. But it grew through the courage of many. The quiet connections she formed in the wake of her experience felt like threads weaving together a fabric of shared understanding. One small but significant step toward a world where respect was no longer the exception, but the rule. Underscore 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 underscore. On a crisp autumn evening, Layla and Marcus attended a community gathering at a local library. The topic of the event was inclusivity and equity. And the room was filled with people of all ages and backgrounds. As the discussion began, Layla found herself listening intently, her heart swelling with hope as others shared their stories and ideas. When it was her turn to speak, she rose slowly, her hand steady as she gripped the edges of the lectern. The room quieted, the expectant faces of the audience turning toward her. "I'm not here to tell you anything you don't already know," she began, her voice calm but firm. "I'm here to remind you that the smallest actions, the things we say, the way we treat one another can have an impact far greater than we realize. Each of us has the power to make someone feel seen, valued, and respected. And that power matters." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "I learned that lesson not because I sought it out, but because life put it in my path. And while I wouldn't wish the experience on anyone, I'm grateful for what it taught me. Because it reminded me that change isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. It starts with a moment, a conversation, a choice." The applause that followed was warm but not overwhelming, a reflection of the quiet strength of her words. As Layla returned to her seat, Marcus reached for her hand, His eyes shining with pride. Underscore 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 underscore. That night, as they walked home under a sky filled with stars, Layla felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in weeks. The road ahead would still hold challenges. She knew. But she was no longer afraid of them. She had found her voice. And with it, a renewed sense of purpose. Because in the end, Layla understood that the work of creating a better world wasn't about grand gestures or sweeping reforms. It was about the choices each person made, day by day, to see one another fully, to listen deeply, and to act with kindness and integrity. And that, she thought as she stepped into the warmth of her home, was a kind of justice that could truly last.